Welcome to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. This is the last day in January the 31st, 2007. We have with us today Eric John Phelps. The website is VaticanAssassins.org. He's coming out with a new edition of the book, Vatican Assassins. And we're going to look forward to that. That's going to be an electronic resource, I believe, a DVD, CD. Anyway, we're going to get the skinny straight from the individual who penned Vatican Assassins. Eric, welcome again to the Grassy Knoll.
A pleasure to be with you, Viz, and your listeners.
All right, now, this is going to be a CD, right?
Yes, it's going to be a CD. It will probably be nearly, 1,900 pages, has over 750 pictures. For those who really don't prefer to read, they can look at the pictures, read the captions. It's the same story in a very simplistic way.
Okay. Oh, all right. Okay.
And then also they have the permission and the copyright to download it and put it in book form. And any foreigner can put it, translate any portion or all of it in its foreign language.
All right. Excellent. All right. I just want to make a statement, and that is, with all that's going around nowadays, I get it, from those who think I am and you are and Greg Zemansky all nuts. And these are the people who want to hate Jews. And let's call it what it is. It's hatred. Because if it weren't hatred, some kind of intellectual, analytical logic would cut through it. And there's some people who think that all Islam is bad, or the bane of the world. And, as long as you keep that deep-seated resentment, you feed the beast. And that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, now, a very interesting topic, I think, and that is how the Vatican has pretty much gone hand in hand with Islam. So, Eric, pick it up at whatever point you wish.
Okay, I'd like to first point out to your listeners the tremendous parallels between Romanism and Islam. Romanism has a pope. Islam historically had the caliph. Romanism has canon law, which they put that on an equal level with their Bible. And, of course, their Bible is Jerome's Latin Vulgate. It is not the Hebrew Old Testament or the Text Receptus, the Greek text that we use. So, therefore, the Bible that they accept is not the Bible. It is a false Bible, Jerome's Latin Vulgate, and they put that on an equal basis or an equal level with canon law, which includes the Council of Trent today. Third, they have their Jesus. Romanism has Jesus, but this is not the Jesus of the Bible. It is the Jesus who was the Horus of Egypt, the Nimrod of Babylon. It's the fake Jesus. So Romanism has this prophet Jesus. Islam has the prophet Muhammad. Romanism aspires to world empire. Islam is aspiring to world empire. Romanism had the Crusades. Islam has had jihads. Romanism has forced conversions, converse at the edge of the sword. The same is true with Islam. They have forced conversions. Romanism has the return of Christ, supposedly, which in their minds is the final pope to rule the world. Islam has the final Muslim leader, which is the 12th Imam. Rome adores the Virgin Mary, and so does Islam. Islam has a whole section in the Quran on Mary. Rome has rosary beads. The Muslims count beads. They're both religions of salvation by works. You have to do thus and thus and thus to be acceptable with God, which is totally unbiblical in violation of the basic passages such as Ephesians 2:8 and 9. Rome holds Jerusalem to be sacred and aspires its control. Islam holds Jerusalem sacred and aspires to its control. Romanism is anti-Jew. Islam is anti-Jew. The capital of Rome is the Vatican. The capital of Islam is Mecca, in which is the Kaaba. So these are some of the few more obvious parallels between the two religions. And of course the Bible teaches that Rome is the mother of harlots. And therefore Islam is the harlot of Rome. Therefore the Bible teaches that out of Rome, which is now the Mystery Babylon, that all these other religions proceed. So Islam ultimately, according to the Bible, had to proceed from Romanism.
What was first, Eric? I mean, I know I'm asking this rhetorically, but let's put this in a timeline. When does the Vatican come on the scene, and when does Islam come on the scene?
The Vatican comes on the scene formally with the first pope in about 400. Some people say Constantine was the first pope because he was called the Pontifex Maximus. But if you want to be strict about it, the first man who takes the title pope is around 400 AD. So first you have the conversion of the Roman Empire putting on this mask of religion, and it's now called Romanism, where the Pope now claims to be the Bishop of Rome and have the supreme powers over all the other bishops. And that's about 400. But Islam comes on the scene and becomes a powerful religion in the late 600s and early 700s. And that's when they conduct their huge crusade into North Africa. So it's first Romanism and then Islam. And I will show you how Rome was absolutely involved in the raising up of Muhammad, the financing of their jihads and crusades, and then ultimately the negotiations that the Muslims engaged in after their armies were too far extended into Spain. And the man who carried out the negotiation was St. Francis of Assisi.
I'm going to ask you a question right now because it's germane, okay? And folks, if you want to ask questions along these lines, please do so. You can do it by email, visigoth@hotmail.com. You can also use the MSN instant messaging service, and that's Visigoth. And like I said, this is very germane, so let me do a cold read for you. Do you believe the Roman Catholic Church created the Muslim religion through a woman dedicated to the Pope during that time?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. She was a older woman. And I can go through this history because I have it laid out here if you'd like me to.
Sure, and also let me just give you the if-then statement also. It says, if so, can you give a few details as to how this happened? I heard the woman had the task to find the appropriate boy to raise for the leader.
Okay, well, that's partially true. The woman was Muhammad's wife, but Muhammad's mother died when he was around 6 or so. But allow me to interview through the timeline so it'll be clear. Okay, Augustine was the most powerful Roman Catholic prelate in North Africa. And Augustine was, quote-unquote, a church father born in 354, and he was, quote-unquote, winning Arabs to Catholicism. But there were many Arabs who would not convert. So therefore, Rome decided to create a religion that they could use as if the Arabs would convert to Catholicism. So what happened was Rome sent spies to spread the rumor that a great leader would appear and gather the Arabs together. In 570, Muhammad was born in Mecca, the messenger of God. He establishes Islam, which today numbers over 1 billion people. His grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib, was a hero in that he found the treasures of Mecca that had been buried previously. He was the father of Abd Allah. And Abd Allah, he was to be sacrificed, and instead of him being sacrificed at the Kaaba, 300 camels were sacrificed. The Roman Catholic Arabs then pushed the concept of looking for an Arab prophet. So the Vatican now is pushing this concept of an Arab prophet coming on the scene. Well, the father of Muhammad, who is Abd Allah, marries Amina, A-M-I-N-A-H. She becomes pregnant. Soon after, the father, Abd Allah, dies, but Amina is pregnant with Muhammad. In 570, Muhammad is born, and he grows up, and this is what he says, because Muhammad was secretly tutored by agents from the Vatican in the writings of Augustine. And here is what Muhammad said, quote, Satan touches every son of Adam the day his mother beareth him, save only Mary and her son. He can only get this from Augustine, because what they're teaching Muhammad is the virgin birth of the Roman Catholic Christ, who is not our Christ, of course, and the virgin birth of Mary, which was only made a doctrine in 1854 by Rome. So through the teaching of the doctrines of Augustine to Muhammad, he believes this. And so now we see the very beginnings of the alignment of Rome with Muhammad. Muhammad takes, go back a little bit. Muhammad, his mother dies at 6, and his grandfather dies at 8, so he's committed to his uncle's care. At 9 years of age, while on a caravan, a Roman Catholic monk saw him and asked to see the mark on his back. And when he saw this mark, of which the Roman intelligence at the time knew that this young boy had this mark, he said, "This is the seal of prophethood." And he warned the uncle of Muhammad not to allow him near the Jews, for the Jews would seek to kill him. So right at the get-go, he's teaching anti-Jewish theory. At 25, Muhammad takes a wife, Khadijah, Khadijah, Khadijah. She was a wealthy Arab woman who was a faithful Romanist, and she gave her treasure to the Vatican, and she entered a convent. Well, they had a plan for this Khadijah. They remove her from the convent, and they send her to Muhammad for him to take her as his wife. They have 2 sons and 4 daughters. One of the daughters is Fatima. And Muhammad devours the works of Augustine while he's being advised. And Khadijah's cousin, his Roman Catholic cousin, his name is Waraqua. Waraquah, Waraqua. And he proclaims Muhammad to be the prophet of the Arabs. So now Rome has their Muhammad prophet. Now they have to create the religion of Islam. So we have here. Okay, now Muhammad and his fathers they refused to worship the idols in the Kaaba, so they had to flee to Abyssinia, and they're protected by a king, King Negus, Negus, and he's the Roman Catholic king of Abyssinia. And the reason why he protects Muhammad, of course, the king is under orders from Rome, but Muhammad also has the same views about the Virgin Mary that Rome has. And so, according to a myth, one night Muhammad is sleeping next to the Kaaba, and an angel takes him to Jerusalem. And then from Jerusalem he ascends into heaven, and he receives the creed of Islam. Then he returns to earth, and he begins his wars. And one of the doctrines that is put forth is that Abraham did not sacrifice, about to sacrifice Isaac on the rock there, over which the Dome of the Rock is built, but that Abraham was to sacrifice Ishmael. And that's why Islam built the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem over the ancient temple site. And it is now the third most holiest site in the religion of Islam, first Mecca, then Medina, and then Jerusalem's Dome of the Rock. So after this revelation that Muhammad supposedly gets, after his ascension into heaven and return, he starts his wars and he begins his attacks on the Jews in Medina. In 630, with 10,000 men, he takes Medina. The leaders submit. And in 632, he dies. He has 9 wives, 1 Roman Catholic concubine, and he is entombed in Medina. So Muhammad is born in Mecca. He ascends into heaven, quote-unquote, with his vision from Jerusalem, and is buried in Medina. Those are the 3 most holy places in the Arab world. Now, furthermore, we see Augustine. Augustine, now, as I mentioned, he's the creator of Muhammad. After Muhammad's death, the Pope issues bulls granting the Arab generals to conquer and invade North Africa. And who do they kill? They kill Bible-believing, many of them Arab and black, New Testament Christians, because, the gospel went to the blacks in Ethiopia in Acts chapter 8 with the Ethiopian eunuch who was the great eunuch Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians. So there were many blacks who were saved. There were New Testament believers in Ethiopia and in North Africa. And so the deal was, when Rome raised up these Muslim armies, was that they would do 3 things. They would kill the Jews, they would kill the true New Testament Christians, they would protect the Augustinian monks and the Arab Catholics, that's number 2. And the third thing they would do is they would conquer Jerusalem for the Pope. It's most intriguing. This is exactly what happened in North Africa. The Jews were slaughtered. The North African Christians were massacred. But no Catholic monasteries were sacked, and no Catholics were killed generally. And the thing where they reneged was they refused to give Jerusalem to the Pope. Well, they enter into Spain, and as a result, they see their armies are too far extended, and so they negotiate with St. Francis of Assisi, And the agreement was that the Muslims could occupy Turkey in the Catholic world, and that the Catholics would be allowed to occupy Lebanon in the Arab world. And that the Muslims could build their mosques in Catholic countries, and the Catholic Church could build their churches in Arab lands. Those were the three terms of that final surrender to St. Francis of Assisi. So what we have here is Rome raised up Islam, but it became a disobedient harlot, calling the Pope an infidel and refusing to give Jerusalem to the Vatican. So as a result of that, we now have the Crusades. And we have some 8 Crusades that follow on the heels of this. And the first Crusade, led by Godfrey, takes Jerusalem from the Muslims, but Godfrey never took it for the Pope. So the Pope has never been allowed to hold Jerusalem until it was taken by his British in 1917, and then ultimately given to his Masonic Jewish Labor Zionists in 1967, and deeded to Rome in 1993 by Yossi Beilin and Shimon Peres. So the Pope has always wanted Jerusalem. Islam refused to give it to him, but when he reconquered Islam in the late 1700s and 1800s, Islam then became his tool once again. And I'll pause here now for comments from you.
Well, I tell you what, one of the things that had crossed my mind, and this is a little bit of a digression, so bear with me, but there's an irony in this for myself and my wife. We were married by a minister out of the Evangelical Free Church, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegian out of northern Illinois. And that occurred in 1984. And he left about 2 years later. And at that time, before he left, he was saying, he had to go through language training and stuff. And he said to me, I'm going to go to Belgium to evangelize the largest Muslim population at that time, okay, in Europe. And I'm thinking this blonde-haired, blue-eyed going over there, and I'm like, okay, his name was Roy Oxnabad. Anyway, what I want to say is that at the time he said to me, and I just remember these words, because, really Islam wasn't on any of our minds 20 years ago. And he said the Quran, and comment on this if you want to. And by the way, Oxnabad is back stateside at Wheaton, where he's, I guess, an instructor, and also I guess instructing people on the ministry to Muslims here and abroad. But he said to me about the Quran, he said it started off, I guess, like the Bible, and then took a really bad turn. Now, let's talk about. Can we do that? Can we talk about the Quran at this juncture? Sure. All right. Was he right?
No, the Quran has always been evil.
Yes.
The Quran is a book that is full of blasphemy. Mm-hmm. It proclaims, it's even written on the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, God has no son. That the Lord Jesus Christ of the New Testament, from the Textus Receptus, as explained from the Masoretic text, is not the Son of God. That he's not God manifest in the flesh. That he's not the only way to heaven. So it's a contradiction. It's an absolute blasphemous contradiction of what the Bible teaches.
Does the Quran go back to the biblical account, though, of the expulsion of Ishmael and Hagar?
Yes, it teaches the great lie that Ishmael was to be sacrificed by Abraham rather than Isaac. And you see, that right there is the basis for Islam claiming that they have the right to the promised land and not the Jews. The Quran provides the impetus for all on the Arab side, the impetus for the constant agitation in the nation of Israel, the promised land given to the racial descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the 12 sons. Mm-hmm. So we reject the Quran, we Bible believers who accept the Bible as the final authority of faith and practice, being the Bible as champion of the Reformation, and condemned by Rome, and burnt by Rome thousands of times. We utterly reject Islam and the Quran as another one of Rome's harlots because I read to you all the parallels, and then finally it's merely a salvation by works religion, just like Talmudic Judaism. All your three major world religions deny the deity of the true Christ of the Bible. God indeed has no son because the son of Romanism is not the son of the Bible. It's Horus. And therefore all the three great religions of the world are anti-Christ and anti-Bible. and persecute those of us who hold to the true Bible and the true Lord Jesus Christ as our final authority, faith, and practice. So we're not surprised to see the ancient Jews of the past persecute us, who were holding to the Talmud. We are not surprised to see the Muslims persecute us, who hold to the Quran and regard us as infidels. And we are not surprised to see Rome persecute us, who consider us to be heretics, and those of us such as ourselves, obstinate heretics. So all three great, quote-unquote, great world religions who lay claim to Jerusalem are all work salvation and persecute the true believers on the Lord Jesus Christ.
All right, I have a comment here, which I would also put in the form of a question for you to comment on it. Well, the statement is, Islam is medieval Mormonism.
Very good comment. It's identical to the creation of Mormonism. Very good comment. Rome secretly setting up Mormonism using the prophet Joseph Smith, and then later Brigham Young. I show in my book that Brigham Young was advised by America's most powerful Western Jesuit, Pierre de Smet, as to where to settle in the Great Salt Lake Basin when they met in Iowa. So yes, the way Islam was created is exactly the same way Mormonism was created, and both of them persecuted Protestants. When the Protestants were coming west to settle, they were massacred by the Mormons, and both of them are in the mystery schools, because high-level Mormonism is Masonic.
Well, then I'm going to do a little law of substitution here, too. Would it be, then, that if Mormonism bears similarities to Islam, and they both, do they not, bear a great deal of symbolism with Freemasonry, as does adorn many, many Catholic churches?
Absolutely correct. Because Freemasonry is really the pure ancient mystery religion of Babylon as extended into Egypt. So we look for that tie in Mormonism, Islam, and Romanism, and we find it. And we find it in, for example, all your high Islamic leaders today are Masons. That includes Saddam Hussein, who wasn't killed, Yasser Arafat. You name them, they're all high-level Freemasons. I show that the Sultan of Turkey, of the Ottoman Empire, was in agreement with the Masonic Jewish Labor Zionists, the Sabbatean Frankists, that if the Sabbatean Frankists would help and participate in the murder of the Christian Armenian people in Turkey, that the Sultan would not raise a battle against the British for the taking of Jerusalem. And that's exactly what happened. The British came in and took Jerusalem without firing a shot. The Turks withdrew. So yes, we see this Masonic connection here in all three. We see it in high-level Shriner Freemasonry, where when a Mason becomes a Shriner, he essentially embraces the religion of Islam. And that's where we're talking about men like J. Edgar Hoover, that stinking Earl Warren. They're all high-level Shriners.
I got another question to ask you about similarities, too. But I want to tell you, long before I was thinking the way I was, I lived for a year in South Royalton, Vermont, right across the river from Route 12, off of which was the birthplace of, guess who? Joe Smith.
Joseph Smith.
And we drove in there on a very eerie but somewhat lovely long drive, and there's a statue of him. I can't tell you how tall it is. But, I mean, at that time, I had no idea who he was. And, of course, later on I would come to understand that. But it was a spooky thing, to say the least. But anyway, we also have a similarity in the fact that Islam has Muhammad, that Mormonism has Joseph Smith. Right. And then can we even look at the Jesuits / Romanists and say they had Loyola?
You know, you got a point. That's a great point. The Loyola, well, I have a quote in my book that shows that they attribute everything of Jesus Christ to Ignatius Loyola. They attribute Hebrews chapter 1, you know, when God who spoke in many and diverse ways to the prophets has spoken unto us in these last days by His Son. They substitute Ignatius Loyola for that.
Right.
So they made a Jesus Christ out of Ignatius Loyola. That's true. Wonderful point. I never thought of it.
Let's see. Oh, yeah. Well, another thing I want to ask, and as I'm reading some other comments, have you ever seen that classic photo of, I don't know what city the lodge is in, but it's in Egypt. Have you ever seen the photo of that lodge there and the personages who are in the photo?
I have never seen it, but I know that it's a Grand Orient Lodge and it's in Cairo.
All right, I will tell you, it has now hit me where I found it. There is a website called blackraiser.com, and that is spelled R-A-I-S-E-R. Blackraiser,
blackraiser.com.
Yeah, RAISER.com.
Okay.
And if you scroll down, and it's got some very interesting information there with regard to Islam, Turkey, and Germany, and kind of fills in some of the gaps there for those of us who have ever scratched their head wondering, why did Germany and why did Germany and Turkey partner up in World War I?
Right. And another interesting thing about this is it's not only Kaiser Wilhelm II was totally controlled by the Vatican. Remember, he buys a castle or a huge monastery, I believe, in Rome, and Victor Emmanuel II had expelled the Jesuits in 1872 from Rome, which they ultimately poisoned him. But in 1893, after 21 years of expulsion, the Jesuits were readmitted into Rome through the influence of the Kaiser. So we see Kaiser Wilhelm is in the back pocket of Rome. That's why he got rid of Bismarck, because Rome considered Bismarck the manifestation of the devil, because he kicked the Jesuits out of Prussia. So yes, the Kaiser allows the Redemptorists back into Germany, and the Redemptorists are the right arm of the Jesuits. So he allows them back in. And then in 1917, while the Kaiser is still the Kaiser, waging World War I, and obviously working World War I for the destruction of the Protestant Second Reich, he allows the Jesuits back into Germany in 1917. So the Kaiser was working with the Sultan of Turkey. Behind the Armenian massacre, well, I believe they killed closer to 2 million Armenians.
Mm-hmm.
And they were also working together. Now get this. I found this in Larkin's work, his book on dispensational truth, that they were working together to have a railroad to Baghdad, to ultimately Babylon, for the rebuilding of Babylon. And this is exactly what the Bible says. Babylon must be rebuilt. That ancient city of commerce and trade has to be rebuilt because it has to be destroyed a certain way. And according to Isaiah 13 and Jeremiah 50, it has to be destroyed by fire, and no inhabitant can ever live there. Babylon was never destroyed that way. And this is one of the purposes for the war in Iraq. It's a war of annihilation. It's an urban renewal, if you please, so that Halliburton and other major American companies can be involved in rebuilding Babylon, and Dick Cheney is a high-level Freemason.
All right, so then you're stating that what we are seeing now is the early stages of the recreation of Babylon.
That's correct.
Which historically had always been in Iraq. Is that true?
That's correct. On the Euphrates River between Iran and Iraq, which evidently necessitates the invasion of Iran.
All right. Now to another question. As we're speaking about Muslims and Arabs who may be Masons, is there any, it's hard to say is there any proof, but is there any indication, let's just say, that Saddam was a Mason?
Oh, yes. You know a people by who they hang with. And I have a picture of Saddam Hussein.
Wait a minute. Are you talking about like the vernacular or by the noose? Be careful here.
Yeah, I'll make it clear. You know the people by the company they keep. Okay.
Okay.
For example, Yasser Arafat has 8 audiences with the Pope. You think he's an agent of Rome? Why, of course.
Duh.
And all the high agents of Rome are in some sort of mystery, a secret cult. It's either the Knights of Malta or high-level Freemasonry. If you're not, you don't get in. The next thing is, I have a picture of Saddam Hussein at a shooting range with King Hussein of Jordan. King Hussein was well known to be a Mason. When Clinton went to Jerusalem, went to Israel, he was called King Hussein. Yitzhak Rabin and Bill Clinton were called the Masons for Peace back in 1994, I believe. So they were all Masons, all working together. And Saddam Hussein was in the presence of his relative, King Hussein of Jordan. The Husseini dynasty is always Masonic at the top. Okay?
Now, here's the thing, though, too. You look at high-degree Freemasonry, and it's your belief, too, isn't it, that it goes beyond 33 or even whatever they have in New York, which would be, 13, I think, or something like that. Are we looking at degrees that go far beyond what we are told about it?
Yes. Oh, yes. According to Dr. Stuart Crane, who used to teach at Bob Jones University, he said that the Freemasonry is built on a circle with 360 degrees. Therefore, there has to be some sort of 360-degree cycle. Aleister Crowley, we knew, was in the 90th degree, the Rite of Mizraim. So it goes much higher than 33rd degree. There are select 33rd degree Freemasons who go higher, according to Jim Shaw in his book, The Deadly Deception. There are 33rd degree Freemasons that stay there and don't go any higher. But it depends how you respond to the questions that are put to you when you become the 33rd degree.
I got into discussions with a proprietor of an establishment we used to go to. And I don't know how it came out, but he told me he was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason out of Rochester, New York, now down here. Interestingly, in a German Catholic enclave. And this guy left the Baptist church to become a Catholic, so go figure. But he got irritated with me when I suggested that there was a cabal in Freemasonry beyond whatever he knew, and he got all upset about it, and he went and got me the 2 volumes of Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, and I told him I saw it. Where? Ironically, in a Catholic library. Go figure. But however, I'm saying, did you ever read Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike? I said, he's the one that set up what you belong to this day. And he said he did. And I said, don't you think you might want to look at that? And then it dawned on me, too, that when Pike was talking about what he called more or less the porch members that wouldn't know what was going on,
correct.
I'm wondering if that porch extends to 32 or 33 degree Masons, that they don't know what's going on upstairs.
That's correct. It
all
extends to all 32nd degree Freemasons, and it extends to the majority of 33rd degree Freemasons. It's only a minority of 33rd degree Freemasons who answer the question correctly. When you're in the temple there in Washington, D.C., who go farther. And J. Edgar Hoover was one who went farther. So they have a cabal within the cabal that goes farther. And, of course, we see high-level Freemasons who are cardinals in the Vatican. We see the book, In God's Name by Yallop. And so there are high-level select Freemasons that you don't hear about, such as Adolf Hitler. Hitler was a member of the 99 Lodge in Dresden. Nobody talks about the 99 lodges. Benito Mussolini, even though he closed down the Grand Orient Lodge in Rome, he was a high-level Freemason, because you know who brought him to power? It was King Victor Emmanuel III, the king of Italy, and he was a high-level Grand Orient Freemason. And it's also the same Victor Emmanuel III that removes Mussolini from power when he became disobedient, when Mussolini wouldn't purge the Jews out of Rome. And so we have select high-level Freemasons that openly are anti-Masonic, like Mussolini, like Franco, like Hitler, when secretly they are in the Brotherhood in select, covert, covered Masonic lodges.
One of the things that a listener has asked, wondering, I guess, as you refer to it, and being, I think, facetious in saying a kind of urban renewal, if you will. He said, the military going house to house, killing civilians, taking their guns, and using general urban tactics that are somewhat new. She wonders if this may, in fact, be a bit of a testing or proving ground for what may take place, not only in the United States, but I would say in other countries where I believe you're going to have foreign troops implement martial law prior to, I guess, the creation of a one-world government.
No doubt. I think they're practicing for the U.S. I think they're getting the troops groomed for house-to-house invasion in the major cities. Because remember that we have all these concentration camps here, some 600 of them, and they're all going to be sent there. I tend to believe, the Jesuits, they run Hollywood, and they use their Masonic Jewish labor Zionists to be openly the heads of it. But the Jesuits run it, and they tell you what they're going to do. Well, 2 movies that they told us what they were going to do in, with regard to these huge concentration camp centers. The one was called The Escape from New York with
Kurt Russell.
And that would be a perfect thing to do. Make Manhattan just one big concentration camp.
It already is.
It already is. But What I tend to think is you have so many Jews there that they could pull off some low-level nuclear detonation and then kill lots of Jews, because the Jesuits always want to kill Jews. The three major Jewish populations in this country are in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, which makes them primary targets for low-level nuclear detonations and ultimately immediate martial law. But yes, I would agree with the lady, or the person that talked about the house-to-house search.
And she's also former militaries, and she had spent some time in Bosnia, I believe.
That's another issue we can talk about. Showing the link between Romanism, which controls America, because remember the 14th Amendment America, the Pope's Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire has been the hammer for the Vatican since Theodore Roosevelt.
I agree.
Every war we've been involved in has been a papal crusade, every one of them, and we have lost every one of them. We haven't won one of them. We went deeper into debt. Our sons and daughters were murdered. They put more and more fascism upon us under the guise of communism, because communism always creates corporate fascism in the end. It destroys the middle class, consolidates wealth in the hands of a few, and so they put this upon us all the time throughout these wars, like the voluntary income tax on your wages in 1942. So they had to put this income tax, quote-unquote, upon us to finance the Crusades, and this is exactly what they did in the Dark Ages. They put income tax on the priests and the nobles to finance the Crusades. Same identical thing. So, yes, the Islam and fascism now always work together, and we see this in Hitler's Third Reich. We see this with Mussolini, and we see this with Franco. And it might be good to review those three when you're ready.
All right, and I would like to do that a little bit later, too, only because I want to insert this while we still can. Because it's interesting also the brush that the Serbs had with Muslims on two occasions. One of them, I believe, during the Second World War. I may be wrong about that, but certainly as it related to what took place there, that obviously led to the demonization of Milosevic,
right,
and who was running the drugs out of Afghanistan in those days.
Right. We have to remember that Rome has always hated Orthodox Christians, because Orthodoxy refuses, or at least for many, many years, refuses to accept the primacy of the Bishop of Rome. And so that is why the Jesuits created Bolshevism, fomented the Bolshevik Revolution, used its American empire to finance it, and Woodrow Wilson gave $100 million to the Bolsheviks. And Woodrow Wilson was the creature of James Cardinal Gibbons, the first real American Pope, Archbishop of Baltimore. And Wilson's advisor was Joseph Tumulty. His real secretary, his real alter ego was Joseph Tumulty, not Edward Mandell House. And Tumulty was a knight of Columbus, subordinate to James Cardinal Gibbons.
All right, so is the old deal with regard to house that they hold house out and everybody can look at that? Right.
Look at the Masonic Jew, he's the one, but the real power behind Wilson was Tumulty.
You know,
right. But back to this, they financed Bolshevism, and then they put they used the Bolsheviks, and Warren Harding, then with his Herbert Hoover, sends another $60 million worth of food and arms into the Bolsheviks, into Russia, to save the revolution, because it was dying, and then they proceed to murder throughout from 1920 on to 1989, even now, probably 60 million Orthodox Russian Christians, none of whom were communists. So they use America as their hammer to finance and pay for and arm Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease gave billions of dollars to completely arm the Soviet military and the Soviet government so we could kill all the condemned heretics in Russia. And Stalin killed at least 1 million Jews. So we see the hatred for the Orthodoxy. This was brought over to the Serbs. In World War II, 700,000 Serbs were butchered and murdered by the Croatian Ustashi. And who was the head of the Ustashi? Why, it was that Pavelic, and Pavelic was under the guidance of the Franciscans, and Pavelic's master was the Archbishop of Zagreb.
Well, that I got it a little bit backwards, but what I was thinking about is that the Serbs obviously had a real problem with the Croatians because of the brutal taskmasters and jailers that they were, right?
Oh, yes. The Croatians, remember, are Catholic.
Right.
Fanatical Catholic.
Right.
Now, one of the things the Germans used to say is God delivers from the Pope and God delivers from the Croatians.
Well, the Serbs, was it you that told a kind of an amusing anecdote to a certain extent that the Serb Air Force during the World War II wanted to go bomb the Vatican?
Yes.
And it got cloudy and they called off the mission?
Cloudy, that's right, and they could not take off. And as soon as Hitler found out about it, Goering sent his Luftwaffe off and they bombed the Czechoslovakian or the Yugoslavian Air Force, yes, that's right. But they were on the verge of bombing the Vatican because they knew all of this. The Stasi was all controlled by the Vatican. In fact, Hitler put Pavelic in power, and Hitler, his top man in that area was Wiesenmeyer, Edwin Wiesenmeyer, who was top SS and a Jesuit coadjutor, and oversaw the Stasi in the killing of the Orthodox there in Serbia, in Bosnia.
And then, of course, in the former Yugoslavia back in the 90s, what wasn't too well spoken about is because they had to make this particular segment of the world's population look sympathetic. But from what I understood is that not only were the Albanian Muslims, the KLA, involved in muling drugs into Central Europe, but apparently they were creating, I believe it was like Mother Teresa type organizations that sounded like they were completely philanthropic and such.
Right.
And what they were doing is they were bringing in, under the guise of, like, say, Russian farm implements in trains, what they really were weapons for the Muslims.
Uh-huh.
And you've not heard this, have you?
I have heard this, but I was not familiar with the details.
Yeah, and apparently then they went surface shipping from, I guess it was Italy to Yugoslavia. And that's one of the enterprises that the Muslims had going at that time. So here you got, this reintroduction of the Vatican perhaps instigated intrusion into Serbia, this time using Muslims. And one of the accounts I remember hearing was that there was a Muslim Albanian who said it was my own people that drove me out of my house to try to exacerbate this ethnic cleansing situation.
Yep, that makes perfect sense.
And
that's typical of the way they operate in exacerbating these things, right? But the other thing I wanted to mention, too,
sure.
Remember Heinrich Himmler? Heinrich Himmler had his Handschar division. And the Handschar division were all Bosnian Muslims. The Handschar means cutthroats.
Mm-hmm.
They were all the cutthroats. And who was advising Hitler from 1941 to 1945, helping to recruit all these cutthroats? It was Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, that was put in power by the Jesuits using Masonic Jewish labor Zionists, who was the Lord High Commissioner of Palestine, Herbert Samuel. So we have Islam working always in conjunction with fascism. Always. We see it with Hitler, and we see it here because our empire here is fascist. If you go to the Justice Department of Washington, D.C., you see the gates there. You will see a bundle of rods with an axe protruding at the top on both sides of the gate as it opens at the Justice Department.
Fascist.
If you look at the Congress, the American Congress, you see Congress and the House of Representatives, on each side of Nancy Pelosi, that good Roman Catholic, you will see the signs of the fascists on both sides. So we have a fascist empire, therefore fascism always works overtly or covertly with Islam. So we should not be surprised to see George Bush working in conjunction with Saudi Arabia to bring about the 9/11 fiasco and the war against Islam. Because remember, all the leaders work together against the peoples of their own countries.
I want to mention at this time also, because I think this augments what you've done, and I'll be honest with you, sometimes folks have said to me, well, is there any other experts on this besides Eric? And one of the things I would say, folks, especially with visuals, Dr. Walter Veith from AmazingDiscoveries.com, we've had John Triplett from that particular organization on. But Veith does good work, and one of the things he does is go through the similarities of architecture and symbolism that you find both in the Catholic Church, especially as it pertains to Europe, and also
Islam.
Mosques.
Yep.
So, I mean, if that's what's needed, I mean, there's another way to go. Sure. But now what I want to know is, since we did establish the fact that the Vatican predated Islam, was Islam created or at least instigated to, one, of two things, or both, to control Arabs, and two, to be more or less a thorn in the side of that area, and especially of Jews, for a time that we may be seeing upon us?
That's very good. Islam is the Romanism for Arabs. It's the same identical religion, but with another name. So therefore, because the Arabs were not converted under Augustine, so they created a new religion for them. They financed it. They taught Muhammad. They taught him his doctrines. They financed the Crusades. They financed his great armies and wars. So yes, it was to use the Arab to do the dirty work of the Pope, to kill Bible-believing Christian people, and Jews. And that's exactly what they do today, and that's why we always see fascism, which according to the Jesuits is Rome's favorite form of government. In fact, it's defended by in Pius IX's Syllabus of Errors of 1870, 1864. So it's their favorite form of government, so we should not be surprised to see fascism work together with Islam, especially the Wahhabi Islam. And it was Benito Mussolini who was brought to power by the Jesuits. His advisor was Pedro Tacci Venturi, the secretary of the Society of Jesus, and it's Benito Mussolini that greatly helps in the financing and the birth of the Pope's oil bonanza, Saudi Arabia. Because he backed the Wahhabis that were given Mecca and Medina. And also Mussolini was called in 1937, I have a picture of it in my book. He's raising a sword, he's sitting on a horse, and he was proclaimed the protector of Islam in Libya. We see the same thing with Franco. When Franco invaded Spain in 1936, he was blessed by the Vatican to do so. And what does he do? He uses 40,000 Muslim Arab troopers as his janissaries to attack into Republican Spain. Some of them were communists, but most of them didn't want any more Roman Catholicism, no more Roman hierarchy governing and destroying their country. They expelled the Jesuits, by the way, in 1932. So this was Jesuit payback against the Spanish people, particularly the Basques, who dared to expel the Jesuits, who dared to kick all the priests out of the teaching in Spain, and who confiscated all their property. The Jesuits used Franco, and his high-level Masonic partners, even though he was anti-Masonic openly, and he was led by Cardinal Segura, and Franco uses 40,000 Muslim troopers to destroy the Protestants of Spain, and he killed 600,000 of his own people. He said, I am prepared to kill every Spaniard in Spain to restore the power of the Pope.
I mentioned this to you off mic, but and for folks, if you've heard Kevin Annett in his interview with me, he's the person who's championing Aboriginal peoples in Canada's their rights because of the atrocities that have occurred up there, experimentation on them and such. But in an email, and this is what I'm saying about a lot of us have never really been open or haven't really looked upon the Jesuits and the Vatican as nefarious as they've been. When you go back and I look at books that I have, I never really realized, because I just passed off the Jesuits as being a monk, a bunch of monks. But Annette says to me in an email that he would get me in touch with somebody who could speak to the Duplessis catastrophe at the hands of the Romanists in Canada, and that's an orphanage. Do you know something about that, Eric?
Yes, the person can contact a very nice lady. I've been on her program a couple of times. Her name is she goes by the name of Hepzibah, and her website is eyeonthefuture.com. And she is a native of Canada also, and she talks a lot about the Jesuits, the Vatican's killing the native she calls them First Nations in Canada. Also the Mormons, they were killing them too.
And you know Charles, of course, and Charles sent me some information that just recently, and Annette spoke to this also, that the Roman Catholic Church refused to apologize to those who were obviously damaged for life and worse. But Annette, in one of the emails, said something to me, and I said, well, I'm really no fan of the Vatican. And he wrote back, and he said, yeah, neither am I. He said, my French ancestors were Huguenots, and they were wiped out by them.
Right. The revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685 destroyed the best population of France.
Again, I'm sorry, Eric.
And drove them out, I think it killed 500,000 of them, drove another million out into foreign nations, and many of them came to the Carolinas, and our first Chief Justice, one of the authors of the Federalist Papers was a Huguenot, John Jay.
Would it be fair to say that the perfidy committed by the Vatican and the Jesuit order is an easier sell, so to speak, in Europe because of the connection that many of the people there have with, as Annette said, real-life involvement and execution at the hands of the Vatican and Jesuits throughout the centuries.
Absolutely. Any Englishman who knows his history knows the duplicity and the perfidy and the wickedness of the Jesuit order and their attempts to destroy that nation and bring it back under the temporal power of the Pope. The same is true with France. But the gospel never took a strong hold in France because the Jesuits killed them out first with the Bartholomew's Massacre, St. Bartholomew's Massacre in 1572, and when they murdered Coligny and many other Huguenots there. And then finally in 1685 when Pierre Lachaise ordered the destruction to Louis XIV of all the Huguenots. So France has hated the Jesuits. France, according to my count, has expelled the Jesuits no less than 8 times. And I devote a lot of pages in my book to France. And in fact, France expelled the Jesuits in 1902, and that's why they were wasted at the Somme in these huge battles of World War I by their traitorous leaders. So yes, the French have paid terribly for this. The Germans have paid terribly for their suppression of the Jesuits in 1872. The Italians have paid terribly. So all the European nations know quite well of what they've done, including Russia, because remember, Russia had expelled the Jesuits with Alexander I in 1820, and they were formally expelled from Russia until they were formally restored by the Pope's agent in 1922, Vladimir Lenin.
What were the, even the most trivial or the smallest of all catastrophes and massacres is obviously egregious. But of the larger, more known extirpations, you would have the Huguenots. You also have, who else? The Cathars?
No, that's before the Jesuits. The Cathars are before the Jesuits, along with the Albigensians, but it's the same canon law that does it. It's really championed by Thomas Aquinas, and I quote in my book his maxims that it's no murder to kill a heretic. And I had to go back to the 1880 edition because they've eliminated after every edition after the 1880 edition, they've eliminated that. So yes, it's canon law to eliminate all these what Innocent III called these little foxes who are all tied together by their tails. And so that's their purpose, because the Pope cannot have established and maintained his temporal power in any country that reads the Bible and therefore resists pursuant to biblical maxims and the power of the Spirit of God.
Also, I have a real hole here when it comes to this particular group. Was there any involvement with the Jansons?
Oh, the Jansenists?
Yeah.
Oh, my, yes. The Jesuits got a bull pronounced against them, outlawing them. Because, you remember, the greatest enemy of the Jesuit order to date is Blaise Pascal. And Blaise Pascal wrote his provincial letters. And it's still a classic today, still as true today as it was then. They hated his guts. And the Jansenists did not believe in the temporal power of the Pope. To them, Romanism was merely a religion. They acknowledged the spiritual power of the Pope, but he had no temporal power. He had no right to govern any nation. And so because the Jesuits hate that doctrine and seek to establish universal temporal power, they destroyed the Jansenists.
Because I went to a couple of websites that are Catholic, and they actually can justify that stuff.
Well, of course, because if the Pope is the universal monarch of the world, and he has the right to rule all nations, then the Pope has the right to slit the throats of wolves, and I have that quoted in my book by a Jesuit.
I'm just taking a look at the time. I better get to this if you don't mind. There is a question that David from California had previously issued. So can we deal with that now?
Sure.
Okay. He said, Eric, you have much to say on the atrocity to the Protestants in the first 30 Years' War. I was wondering what your opinion of Gustavus Adolphus was. Because on one hand, Gustavus came along and fought brilliantly and successfully for the Protestant cause. But on the other hand, the fact that Gustavus came along didn't that extend the war and make it worse for Protestants in the long run? I was just wondering about your take on this guy and what he did.
Gustavus Adolphus was the hero of the 30 Years' War. If Gustavus Adolphus, because remember, Gustavus Adolphus was indeed a godly man, and he was very simple. He wasn't the typical, extravagant, wicked king that existed at that time.
And that was of Sweden, is that correct?
He was from Sweden, that's right. When he landed on the continent, the first thing he did was he got down in the sand, and he prayed, and he asked the Lord to bless his armies for the sake of the preservation of his faith and for the German Lutheran nation. That's what he did in front of all of his soldiers. And so Gustavus, fought many battles, and he was ultimately killed at the Battle of Lutzen. But without Gustavus Adolphus, there is no victory in the 30 Years' War. There would have been no peace with Westphalia. The Jesuits would have taken all of Germany. That would have been the end of Lutheranism. So no, we need to keep Adolphus right up there, right along with Cromwell.
All right, this is the last one we're going to have time for, and this was being batted back and forth between myself and a listener, and that is, we kind of make light of this, but you know, you look at what we've done today, the U.S. military being misused as it is, to be sent 2,000 miles away to combat this axis of evil, or part of it. Okay, but the thing is, as we well know, whether it was staged or not, Cuba was presented to us as a boogeyman back right after the revolution. Obviously, I remember being, I guess it was in the 6th grade in October, wondering if we were going to hear something over the radio that said, okay, folks, head down to the bomb shelters because we're at war with Cuba. And, of course, we had that Russian intrigue as well. But what's really funny is the fact that for having an enemy 90 miles off this very state's coast, nothing ever happens. And yet we go off 2,000 miles. So my point is, Cuba, Fidel knew the handshake. He and the Pope are joined at the hip. There's no two ways about it. There's a Roman Catholic population there. And isn't it kind of strange, too, if there's such a big enemy, how in the world do they brook having an American base there?
That's right.
That the Cubans go there and punch the clock every day as if it were, Johnson & Johnson or something like that. So the point is, well, the thing is, it's a rigged deck, but Cuba, apparently, like Russia to a great extent, nobody touches them.
That's right.
So what can we see as far as what both of these countries might mean in the time to come?
Cuba is to be the staging base for our invasion. That's why they gave Cuba, that's why Allen Dulles put Cuba in power, put Castro in power. Castro was trained by Jesuits for 7 years.
And don't you think...
Jesuit. High-level Freemason. He was put in power by the American CIA. And that was no mistake. And so they put him in power, and they kept him in power through the Bay of Pigs fiasco by eliminating all of his enemies. And so they have kept Castro in power, and they gave Cuba to this dictator who kicked out all the Jews. There were 11,000 Jews in Cuba. They're gone now. And so now Cuba has underground tunnels. They have weapons there. You can know that the Guantanamo and that Cuban government secretly work together. It has a wonderful staging base into the invasion of Miami. And from what one of my sources says, they have an underground tunnel made by a boring machine from Cuba to Miami. So Cuba is to be the staging base for our invasion. That's why it will never be free. That's why we'll never send one soldier down there to free Cuba. And that's why those poor Cubans in Miami are doomed never to return to their homeland. It's to be our staging base because China is to ferry over the Muslim invaders from Mediterranean, the port of Dakar on West Africa, ultimately to Cuba, and then from there they will be sent into Miami. Because China has its encirclement policy, and I talk about it in my book, the Sino-Soviet Muslim invasion. Okay,
we have another question also. We all kind of believe, I think, in what Brzezinski more or less gave us a heads up to, and that is if we go into Iran, we deal eventually with China and Russia. My thinking is, and I'll throw it over to you, that China will probably stay Asian-bound, I think, and deal with the elimination of the U.S. military on their chessboard. What's your take on China?
I agree. Well, we know that the pipeline that is to be built there is to fuel the Chinese Navy. And so China has been advanced by Clinton and Georg, given all of our high technology, so that when they have the oil and all the necessary resources to invade, they will invade. They will sweep down, take Australia. They teach Australia to be New China in their schools. They will sweep up to take Hawaii, and then they will take the West Coast, which is totally unarmed between San Diego and Seattle. And then they will have a wide open invasion base. They have the Bahamas. They got the Panama Canal. They have a strategic agreement with West Africa and Mediterranean and the other nation south of it has Dakar port, so that they will have an invasion from the east into the southeast, and also an invasion from the west. And for that one reason, they're also bringing the Muslims, the Mexicans in, the Mexican Roman Catholics, that they will participate in this.
We're with Eric John Phelps. We've run out of time. His website, though, is